Virtually Unstoppable: The Rising Tide of Extended Reality by Jackson Nash. Perched on a stool in my friend's front room, I step onto the bridge of a spaceship. In this room, where once we would have huddled around a humming television screen, hands clutching our video game controllers, I now sit alone, a large visor over my eyes, a series of small sensors placed on mantelpieces and shelves, nestled among the usual family photos, are triangulating my position and sending it back to a computer, applying this information to a three-dimensional video feed that is beamed straight into my eyes. After a few mildly amusing minutes, I am happy to take it off.
Oh, good. You're here. I will be your personal guide for the main hall of today's exhibition. Follow me through these doors and try not to get lost. After all, the virtual world can be deceiving, sometimes.
In Steven Lisberger's 1982 film Tron, the protagonist finds himself sucked into a fully immersive and inescapable virtual space. The world that he enters allows him to run, jump, fight, and even drive vehicles with all the same dexterity and skill as in the real world. With fully computer-animated films such as Toy Story 1995 still being over a decade away, audiences were captivated by the rudimentary structures that floated around this alien digital space. With the rising popularity of video game arcades, it was possible to imagine that in the not-too-distant future, we too would find ourselves lost in vast, fully interactive virtual worlds. Today, the technology to make that happen seems to be closer than ever, existing under the blanket term XR, extended reality. A plethora of headsets, glasses, and smartphone apps have leapt into the consumer marketplace, offering both fully virtual, VR, and augmented AR experiences. VR refers to those devices that aim to transport the user into an entirely constructed space, separate from the real world that they inhabit, whereas AR overlays digital elements into our existing surroundings, enhancing our connection with the world rather than severing it. As with many technologies of the previous century, extended reality can trace its roots back to military research and development. For over 30 years, the United States Air Force has been utilizing extended reality to aid in both the safe training of pilots using immersive flight simulators and as graphic elements on pilots' heads-up displays, or hoods, overlaying the wearer's vision with important information such as target identification and optimal flight paths. Today, extended reality has found its way into our pockets and has begun to revolutionize the worlds of communication, entertainment, product design, art, medicine, engineering, and architecture, to name a few. This trajectory was accurately documented and predicted by Nathaniel Bletter's 1993 article, The Virtues and Vices of Virtual Reality, in which he writes, "In due course, the price of virtual reality equipment will fall enough for every architect to have a completely immersive system, just as a computer is now an affordable necessity in any office." Not all predictions for the future of extended reality have been so positive. Recent fictional representations, such as the Black Mirror television episode Men Against Fire, broadcast in 2019, imagine a far more sinister scenario. A world in which the attempted dehumanizing of the enemy, the kind found in the racist propaganda campaigns of recent wars, is given new strength by the government's literal ability to change the way a soldier views their target. One could argue that this is already more than simply fiction. November 2001 saw the world's first successful Predator drone strike against a human target, a fact poignantly included in Mark Anthony Rossi's 2005 collection of essays, in which one writer states, "Devoid of the human context, supermachines transform men into unthinkable killing drones, disconnected from the horror of personal confrontation." The reality, however, is different. A recent New York Times article covering the psychological burdens of US drone pilots reports that although the drone program was developed to give soldiers a sense of safety and distance from the war zone, it appears that giving pilots the ability to kill those who have no way to fight back left those pilots feeling conflicted, angry, and regretful. There is, it could be argued, another side to the story that is extended reality. This story is less about revolutionizing the skilled professions that keep our society running or waging international war. Rather, it revolves around a new generation of children who are spending their childhoods exploring these dual landscapes of the real and virtual as if they had always been in parallel. It is here, with a viral YouTube video that depicts a 3D animated model of pop culture icon Kermit the Frog, explaining why he finds it difficult to make friends outside of virtual space, that we will begin our analysis of the current state of XR.
That did cross my mind, but VR is a way to escape, Like I can be a frog. Kermit was literally my childhood hero. When I was
Throughout this essay, we will refer back to this video and my own personal experiences with the technology in an attempt to contextualize the much larger and more abstract issues that must be considered if we are to understand this technology. While it could be somewhat obvious to regard virtual reality as an escape in order to explain its attraction, this thought provokes the question, escape from what? In the case of this video, it seems that the user utilizes this world as an escape from isolation, a way to avoid being trapped by the situation of being homeschooled, or the loneliness that might arise from a lack of social interactions. This stands out in stark contrast to a widely held view that access to virtual worlds has caused young people to be less social. As Professor Arthur Berger wrote in 2010, "In recent years, I've recognized that computers are devices, whatever else they may be and whatever else they can do, that facilitate connection between people. If this is indeed the case, then we must ask ourselves whether or not it is possible for interactions in digital space to replace or provide the same psychological benefits as real-life conversations and relationships, especially when many of these interactions include some degree of anonymity. With sites such as Reddit, the third most popular site in the United States, having rules against publicly displaying any personal details that might help to identify a user beyond the general area in which they live. In the case of VR chat, no such rules or restrictions exist, but the nature of the platform represents an irresistible opportunity to reinvent oneself as an anonymous avatar. As user Dwabval in Seymour's video describes,
I'd say the closest form of anonymity that isn't anonymous you could get.
What does this mean? Perhaps he's trying to say that true anonymity, the kind experienced in text-based chat rooms, carries with it the inability to make truly personal connections, as one is rendered entirely unidentifiable. Having a motion-tracked 3D avatar, however, allows one's unique physical gestures and voice, what could be described as a person's character, to shine through. One result of this opportunity is that a large amount of users embody humorous and/or satirical characters, reveling in the absurdity of the power they now possess to change their appearance on a mere whim. For others, however, it is far more than this. It represents a chance to abandon a physical appearance that they feel has invited bullying or caused them to be ostracized in their real life. By adopting an avatar that is loved and recognized by other users, and that people associate with a confident, likable, and charismatic character such as Kermit, it is imaginable that a user might feel more able to exhibit those qualities. After a prolonged time exhibiting such virtuous behavior and getting positive feedback in a controlled, virtual space, it may be the case that they would begin to exhibit such qualities in other aspects of his or her life, outside of that environment. In this way, it is possible to see how time spent in a virtual space might be harnessed in regards to a user's social anxieties or self-image, and thus able to be utilized in psychotherapy. One example of this can be found in the portfolio of the digital media company Radical Panda, a company that provides and develops a variety of virtual environments for businesses intended to streamline and improve everything from internal health and safety evaluations to patient-client care and accessibility. Having constructed a lifelike 3D environment modeled after a first-person experience of entering an MRI machine, enough to induce claustrophobia in patients who suffer from the condition, the simulation could then be customized to exaggerate the scale of the machine to a degree that the patient would find more comfortable. After entering this virtual world a dozen times, each time slightly decreasing the scale of the virtual scanner by a small fraction, a patient might feel slowly more accustomed to the experience, and be less likely to suffer distress when the real event occurs. Virtual reality technology has even shown in some studies to be able to remedy not just psychological ailments, but also distract from physical discomfort by forcing the brain to spend extra energy interpreting conflicting sensory inputs, for instance, the fractionally delayed visual input from the VR headset versus the balance recognition of the inner ear. It is important to note, however, that the known benefits of visualization or controlled exposure in relation to phobias, or of providing those suffering from social anxiety with an environment in which to practice positive and constructive interactions, predate digital technology by decades. Exposure therapy itself is rooted in the behavioral therapy movement of the 1950s, first practiced under the name systematic desensitization, through which one attempts to build psychological connection between a phobic stimulus and a positive or calm emotional state. One does not need a virtual reality headset to slowly get used to small spaces, nor does one need a VR chat room to get practice with social interactions. In fact, both of these examples require expensive and often fragile equipment that is not often accessible or inclusive to those who are most vulnerable. We may ask, for instance, how would a severely claustrophobic person react to having a large dark visor strapped around their head? Furthermore, the effects that have in some cases lessened physical pain in a subject have also been shown to introduce a sensation called cybersickness, a kind of virtual motion sickness. It is therefore vital that we don't begin to regard virtual reality as the miracle solution to complex human problems, or we risk validating the claim of Nathaniel Bletter in 1993 when he wrote, "Like other technologies of this century, virtual reality is a solution looking for a problem." Chapter 2. Politically Powerful. The museum assistant gestured towards the platform before helping me to secure my headset. Planting my feet on a hydraulically controlled panel above the floor, I remember being asked if I wanted the easy, medium, or hard experience. As a young man who spent most of his childhood navigating violent virtual worlds on television screens, I thought that this was a simple choice. Almost immediately, I was looking down on a city from the perspective of some kind of incredulously high viewing platform. Gazing at the virtual landscape around me, I felt the solid platform in which I had been stood shift suddenly. And in that second, my nervous system put together two and two and decided that the risk of falling onto the virtual pavement hundreds of meters below and of my subsequent death was in fact very, very real. My legs buckled and everyone laughed. It takes surprisingly little to trick our brains into believing that some virtual threat is, in fact, very real. Take the classic example of the Lumiere brothers' Arrival of a Train, first produced in 1895, a 45-second film that spawned the story of an experience so realistic to audiences that at the time they were seen to leap out of the way of an oncoming locomotive, lest it charged through the screen and hit them. While it seems laughable to imagine such a reaction now, and indeed it may have been a myth from the beginning, is it not possible that future generations will feel similarly about our reactions to current extended reality experiences? What are the implications of this gullibility when it comes to differentiating between what is real and what is simulated? And more importantly, what happens to this flexible perception of reality when these new media are put into the hands of not vulnerable individuals, but politically powerful campaigns? We can try to answer this question by looking at recent events in global politics, and how current communication technologies such as social media and news outlets are possibly being used to play on the public's fears and anxieties to convince us that imaginary dangers are a very serious threat. In an interview with writer Zadie Smith in 2018, journalist Adam Buxton asked Smith to imagine what future generations will think of our current political culture, in which she replied,
"If I had to guess, in 50 years we invented this thing which was all-consuming, and then our real world started to tumble inside it and was for a while warped by our inability to separate the two things."
This begs the question, what exactly is this all-consuming virtual world? And more importantly, presuming it didn't simply sprout from nowhere, who constructed it and why? While digital communication has been developing for many decades by now, it is only in the last 10 years that the dawn of smartphones brought with it the ability to remotely track our location, activities, and even heart rate. All elements of our devices sold to us as beneficial features. This information is not private, nor is it lost or discarded. Rather, it is harvested, stored as data points, and sold to advertisers as a valuable resource. Many would argue that this has been the focus of mass media for the best part of a century, as stated in Richard Serra's short film Television Delivers People from 1973. If we extrapolate then that we are now the delivered product of social media, it must be those doing the collecting and delivering that are responsible for creating the virtual world referenced by Smith in her interview. Arguably, one of the best examples of this virtual world and its effects was the 2016 UK referendum on leaving the European Union, a controversial vote which was covered by the 2019 Netflix documentary The Great Hack, a film which extensively unpicks the events leading up to the vote. The documentary seeks to expose those organizations involved in collecting voter information through social media in order to direct manipulative and intrusive propaganda adverts into their personal online feeds. These claims were further proven by a recent legal case that forced social media giant Facebook to reveal the contents of these targeted advertisements. Perhaps this is an example of the virtual world that Smith was describing. One constructed by political agencies, one that does not have to adhere to the logic of real facts and events, but rather has the ability to warp our perception enough to play on our fears and anxieties, to convince us that non-existent threats are very real. As Raymond Gozzi observes in his book Virtual Reality as a Metaphor, we assume this reality. We talk about it with others. Occasionally, it might even affect what we do. For us, it is reality. But this media-generated virtual reality is an abstraction, a distortion. It centers upon the sensational, the gory, and the exceptional. If we take Gozzi's metaphor as accurate, it would seem that it is misguided to see these new 3D headsets and augmented glasses as the first step in a new technological revolution, but rather as a predictable escalation of an already increasingly fabricated world, in which we are evidently spending more and more of our time. A recent study by British communications regulator Ofcom showed that people in the UK check their smartphones on average every 12 minutes of the day. A statistic which becomes more frequent when singling out younger demographics. With all this taken into consideration, it is no surprise that we jump at the chance to plug our ears and cover our eyes and step into a world that, while entirely fabricated, is at the same time far more consistently decipherable and under our control than the one that we are already living in. As Gozzi suggests in his book, when we put on the headset, we are making the conscious choice to experience a world that is some degree of separation from reality. But when we take it off, we have no choice at all. On the contrary, it should be mentioned that the augmented world of social media and online news does more than just manipulate its users. It has in some cases been used by oppressed and marginalized cultures and societies to spread their own messages quickly and without censorship from local mainstream media. In 2013, Brazil saw a wave of protests sparked by an attempted increase in bus fares that quickly became a more general protest against the lack of social services for the working classes. These protests relied on social media and private online messaging groups to spread the message of protest far beyond the physical limitations of the most populated major cities and public squares, allowing a coordinated and resilient social movement to gain traction within Brazil, but also in the spotlight of the international community. If modern extended reality is to be viewed as an extension of, or reaction to, the current content we are exposed to in our daily experience, then does this mean it also holds the power to change the shape of society in which we live? Chapter 3. Cultural Revolution. When I opened my eyes, I was standing on some kind of hillside path that stretched off into the distance, disappearing among the rolling hills. There was a railing beside me, over which the landscape plunged steeply before flattening out to meet what looked like a harbour, where boats rocked on the water. Every surface of this vast virtual world felt as if it was hand-painted with bold, sweeping strokes, and each stroke was convulsing and rippling as though it was alive. The sky above me, alight with oranges and reds, was also in constant motion. Turning around, a thin, greyish figure blocked my path. Dressed only in rippling black, hairless, mouth agape in some perpetual scream, hands clutching the sides of its face, looking at the overwhelmingly volatile and epic landscape around me, I too put my hands to my cheeks, and I understood. The Tretyakov Museum's VR installation, Edward Munch, A Scream of Nature, was exhibited from April to July 2019. Produced in collaboration with Art VR and VR Tech and shown in combination with previously successful VR experiences, Avant-Garde in 3 Dimensions, Goncharova and Malevich and Ivan Shishkin, Morning in a Pine Forest, aimed to immerse visitors with Munch's famous series of paintings, providing each participant with a new and intimate perspective on the works and a chance to interpret the expression of the artist in a way that arguably wasn't possible prior to this. Of course, Munch is not around to comment on these modern interpretations of his art, and calling this stepping into his painting might be a disservice to the subtle qualities that make his work unique, and installations like this are mere novelties intended to draw crowds. It is true that the positioning of the piece meant that anyone queuing for a regular ticket to the gallery would see several people flailing around in headsets and be more likely to spend the extra cash to find out what was so exciting. This, however, is all subjective, and it cannot be denied that the chance to explore a reimagining of a classic painting in 3D space is a remarkable opportunity to feel more personally, physically connected with the characters and environments of the image. It could be argued that this is the most important and powerful aspect of virtual and augmented realities, the ability to step into a perspective that was previously impossible. This effect has been shown to provoke empathy towards those less fortunate by putting a user in the shoes of someone whose experience of the world is entirely different, as was the case in the 2017 installation Disappearance at Sea, Mare Nostrum. The aim of this VR experience, shown at the Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art in the UK, was to invite visitors on a first-person journey resembling the plight of the millions of refugees who have attempted to flee the Middle East, by employing a mixture of complex documentation processes, including large-scale photo scanning, by which a photoreal 3D environment is created by stitching together and interpreting the information from thousands of individual photographs. The result was described by journalist David Whetstone as a heroic act of reconstruction. Many saw it as a respectful and poignant expression of the life-threatening challenges faced by the innocent victims of war. This power for virtual worlds and experiences to provoke empathetic emotional responses when text or still image might struggle could be due to the personal connection one forms with the environment they are in. It is not a passive act like watching a film, it is an active exploration of a virtual world. Similarly, an avatar seems like more than just a puppet being controlled by a user. When motion tracking and lip syncing is included, that avatar can elicit emotional responses that are similar to observing or communicating with a real person. This is evident in the comments found on Symore's video depicting the bullied teen. These comments are expressing something more profound than simply being emotionally moved by the content of, say, a scripted animation. There appears to be a distinct difference between the experience of watching an animated movie with similar content. There is something about the spontaneity and sincerity of the communication, the awkward yet uncannily realistic way in which the avatar tracks the teen's movement, that reminds us we are listening to a person and not an actor or a Sesame Street puppet. VR Chat allows people from all over the world to form these connections, and setting up an account is entirely free. The result? Thousands of people from all walks of life, all ages, political leanings, all languages, connecting with each other in virtual space, in a way that was previously impossible without physically meeting. Syamore, the uploader of the video, has created a niche for his videos that essentially document these moments of human connection, with video titles such as Kid in VR chat talks about losing her parents. Dying man in virtual reality looks back on his life. Real pastor in virtual reality baptizes an anime girl. Does a virtual baptism grant its participant the same holy blessing as is believed to be held by Baptists in the real world? Does it matter that the water is simulated and that the avatar being baptized resembles a character from Japanese pop culture? For some, it might seem like these details devalue the event, but it could be equally argued that worshippers from previous centuries would have been appalled to find baptisms performed in the heated pools of modern churches. The answer to these questions, it could be said, are inconsequential, and they will not prevent users from pushing the boundaries of what it means to exist in a virtual world. Of course, these VR platforms are far from entirely wholesome. There have been instances in recent years where communities and jokes have formed that can be seen as racist, sexist, inflammatory, or indeed bullying. Derogatory caricatures developed as custom avatars, groups of users sexually harassing others, given power by that same anonymity that makes it easier for others to express kindness and sincerity. There is a conceivable risk that, as with current social media, these virtual reality spaces will become a breeding ground for politically or culturally extreme fringe groups, empowering those in society who we hope would otherwise struggle to meet others who share their views. Chapter 4. Symptom versus cause. For gaming disorder to be diagnosed, the behavior pattern must be of sufficient severity to result in significant impairment in personal, family, social, educational, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, and would normally have been evident for at least 12 months. That is a quote from the World Health Organization in 2018, which officially classified gaming disorder as a psychological disorder only very recently, describing a situation in which a sufferer will continue to increase time spent playing digital video games regardless of whatever negative effects it is having on their own life. It is not hard to imagine how this official classification risks warping society's perspective on these new technologies, scaring the parents of video game-obsessed children, much in the way that previous centuries would have fretted over reading too many comic books. Scholarly articles condemning watching television or reading comic books have attempted to suggest that these forms of entertainment would somehow bring about the downfall of modern moral society. By reacting in such a way to the habits of children, we risk not just overestimating the damaging power of these media, but also underestimating the resilience and flexibility of a young person's psychology, an attitude perhaps most evident in Frederick Wortham's Seduction of the Innocent, a 1954 book that attempts to damn the entire industry of comic books as nothing more than a way to poison a generation's minds, full of phrases such as, "Children's minds are at least as sensitive and vulnerable as a man's stomach." While it is true that children are impressionable, we could surely agree that elements such as parental support, friendships that facilitate emotional communication, and physical health are far more likely to have an effect on a child's psychology than how they access their entertainment or over what platform they choose to talk to their friends. It seems that the concept of a gaming disorder only sounds credible or dangerous due to the fact that the potentially lucrative careers in esports, as well as the intensely social aspects of online gaming, are not often reported positively in Western press. Compare this to, say, the celebrity status of a boxer or mixed martial arts MMA fighter, both sports that risk serious bodily harm and in some cases death. It seems that extended reality technologies will have to somehow pass the same social trials and cultural stigma as the comic book or the television, before we are to find ourselves spending our days exploring virtual worlds and meeting friends that we would otherwise be unable to reach, or simply putting on our augmented reality glasses to watch a movie projected over our walls. Rather than being unveiled as a definitive next step to thunderous applause, XR must slowly prove itself as far more than an expensive novelty, demonstrating its usefulness in the professional creative world in facilitating social connections through smartphone apps and parking assist software in our cars. When trying to answer questions about the implications or effects of extended reality technology on psychology, politics, or society, it eventually becomes apparent that the angle of these questions are inherently flawed. Questions such as these frame the new technology as some kind of outside influence, bestowed upon us by some Promethean deity, for us to figure out and somehow adapt into our lives. In reality, these new forms of media are the result of the rapidly advancing societies in which we live. Arguably, they are nothing more than another way for us to express our desire for connection, our need to augment our own bodies and experiences with tools and filters. To augment and virtualize the human experience is part of what it means to be human. Or rather, as performance artist Stellark writes in 2010, we have always been prosthetic bodies. We fear the involuntary, and we are becoming increasingly automated and extended. But we fear what we have always been and what we have already become: zombies and cyborgs. Psychologically, we've found that extended reality is a multifaceted tool for aiding in the empowerment of the vulnerable and for delivering already well-proven methods of psychotherapy. Politically, it has the potential to be another emotionally manipulative weapon in the arsenal of corrupt national campaigns, but also a fast and influential communication medium for those who seek to oppose or overthrow them. Socially, XR may already be inspiring growing numbers of users to empathize with the lives and experiences of those whose perspective they would otherwise struggle to comprehend, hopefully resulting in a more globally minded population. Virtual reality art can forge a more intimate connection between artist and audience than ever before, and an augmented view of the world could offer direction and translation to those who need it. Yes, there are those who could find themselves unhealthily addicted to these experiences, and these new platforms might also give power to those who we do not wish to be any more empowered. But the same could be said for any major communication or entertainment media that has ever been developed. It therefore seems that it is no more possible to be ready for the rising tide of extended reality than it would have been possible to be so for the smartphone or for email. We must simply trust that these things are an extension of our basic desire to communicate, to explore, the very desires that make us human.